Good to see you guys. If we haven't met, my name's Dave. That was great. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul sometimes uses military metaphors to talk about spiritual things. And for a while, I was like, that's a little weird, because Paul's going to get killed by the Roman military. And if you know the story, Jesus was crucified by the Romans. The Romans used bloody war tactics and violence to, enmesh their power. It's the anti-way of Jesus. So it's kind of strange, but I think what Paul's trying to say is he's not endorsing the Roman violence or anything. What he's saying is sometimes there are realities in our lives, and the military makes a stark metaphor for matters of life and death. I remember right before COVID, the last movie that my wife and I saw in theaters, it was in February of 2020. We had no idea what was coming. And it was a movie. I can't recommend it, mostly because I don't know where all of you are on the issue of watching violence on the screen. But I have not, this movie deeply, deeply impacted me. And it wasn't so much that it was because it was one of my favorite cinematographers of all time. I'm not really a film cinephile, but I'm an amateur cinephile, I suppose. Roger Deakins, one of my favorite cinematographers. But this movie deeply impacted me. It was called 1917, and it was about World War I. And the reason I'm going to share this with you is because the story itself was so arresting. It starts with a young man asleep underneath a tree. And an officer comes and gets him and says, "The general wants to see you." So he gets up and he goes, and the General Aaron Moore, says to him, "Here's what's happened. On the front line of the German Imperial Army, they have retreated and they've fallen back. And our colonel, who's in charge of the Western Front right there, sees them retreating and thinks tomorrow morning he's going to charge with two garrisons, 1,600 men, and he thinks that he can overtake them and turn the tide of this long and deadly war. But what Colonel Mackenzie does not know, but which we know because of aerial photographs, is the Germans are planning an ambush. They have retreated, but they have all their artillery aimed at our troops. And so tomorrow morning, when Colonel Mackenzie makes that run with 1,600 men, all 1,600 will be killed. It will be a massacre. And Lance Corporal Blake, your brother, is in that garrison. So here is a signed, sealed order. You must get it to the front line before tomorrow morning when they charge, or everyone will die." And in just the span of a minute in this film, the audience is immediately taken in. We are fully in. We see the vision. We are crystal clear on the stakes. We know exactly what the stakes are. And so these two, let's be honest, they're boys. Lance Corporal Blake and Schofield have to go out in no man's land, and they have to make their way to the front line to prevent this massacre. And I think when Paul uses military metaphors, what he's trying to say is almost he's telling us, guys, look, I wish it were military. I wish this were just an issue of life and death. But it's way more. I think of Jesus' words in John 10 about his enemy, and that there's a spiritual battle. He says, "The thief comes to only steal, kill, and destroy. I've come you might have life and have it to the full." And then later on, Jesus puts the stakes even further. He says, "What good is it to gain the whole world but lose your soul?" The stakes are much higher than merely life and death. But just like in 1917, when we get the clear vision for what Blake and Schofield have to do, Paul in Romans 8 is giving us a clear vision for what life with God is like. And so in Romans 8, chapters 5 to 11, we have Paul's vision statement for life. I'm going to read it. He says this: "Those who live according to the flesh have their minds set on what the flesh desires. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their minds set on what the Spirit desires. The mind governed by the flesh is death, but the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. The mind governed by the flesh is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so. Those who are in the realm of the flesh cannot please God. You, however, you're not in the realm of the flesh, you're in the realm of the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God lives in you. And if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, they don't belong to Christ. But if Christ is in you, then even though your body is subject to death because of sin, the Spirit gives life because of righteousness. And the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead, and if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, then he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies because of his Spirit who lives in you. And this passage in Romans is kind of what Paul is saying is our vision statement for what it means to live. He gives us this incredibly binary option. Two options. This dichotomy. We can, you and I, have the choice to do one of two things. Live according to the Spirit or live according to the flesh. So a life living according to the flesh is a mindset characterized by you and I living by self-centeredness. By living life for our own. We'll make the decisions, thank you very much, for what we want to do. And Paul says unequivocally, this leads to death. And then he says, or you can live according to the Spirit. This means our whole orientation, our whole lives are aligned with God's purposes, with his character, with who he is. And this leads to, and Paul makes this promise, this leads to life, and then he adds a word, and also peace. And also peace. Right with God, right with others, right with self, right with all of creation. You know, and I read this and I was like, well, wait a second, and maybe you think the same way. Wait, just 1 second. Like, nobody's that binary. I mean, even the best Christian I know doesn't just live entirely according to the Spirit. We all are subject to these things. I mean, isn't every human being, both Christian or non-Christian alike, still in the flesh? I mean, first of all, none of us live perfectly. And secondly, we're all subject to death and decay. When I was in my 20s, I could play basketball for 5 hours. I didn't even have to stretch or barely hydrate. Now, if I sleep wrong, things hurt. Obviously, I am headed toward earthly death. So, what are we going for? What Paul is saying is yes. He's saying, yes, we are both subject to the flesh because we're still living, but that the Spirit overtakes that. Here's what he says in Galatians 2, and this is helpful. He says, I've been crucified with Christ. I no longer live. Christ lives in me. The life that I now live in the body, and the word for body here is the same word, sarx, which means the sin-ridden, fallen flesh that pulls away from God, that I live in that body, but I live by faith, my allegiance to and my trust in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. So he's saying there's this tension, but this is what I am. So in essence, life living according to the Spirit means two things. We die daily to self. We're crucified with Christ, and we ask God for help. And this is kind of like this thing that keeps working. This is what it means. Yes, we're still subject to temptation and to sin and to the sin-ridden, fallen flesh that we live in, but we can overcome that because we have the Spirit. If we ask for help and die to self. And sometimes that's a daily thing. Sometimes, guys, that's an hourly thing. Sometimes that's a minute-by-minute thing. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. It reminds me of what Jay said so compellingly last week as he kicked us off. He said that the intro to the life with the Spirit is repentance. He kind of likened it to AA. The first step of AA, that we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. In a very real way, the first step of AA is the first step of Christianity. We admitted we were powerless over sin, death, and that our lives were unmanageable unless we turned to God for help. This is the entry state. This is the beginning. That somehow the Spirit's indwelling presence transforms believers from within in a way that pleases God. And now, because before we could not actually fulfill the righteous requirements of the law, the Spirit actually enables us to do that. And because that was something that we could not do before because of our human weakness, but now the Spirit enables us to do that. And now you and I can actually live as faithful covenant partners to God. Not perfectly, but we can work to bring his kingdom to earth as his ambassadors. I like to think of it as like directional. You know, sometimes when you're far away from your destination, if your direction's off, it doesn't matter how much effort you put, you're going to be off. But if your direction's right, even if you're far away, at least you have this deep solace. I know I'm heading to the right direction. And some of you know that. I think about the Gospels. How many times Jesus encounters people who looked like they were close to God, but their direction was completely off. You know what I'm talking about? And they were just going in a dark, dark way. And Jesus has really strong words for them. He says, listen, you're leaders, you're priests, you're religious leaders. You should know better, but your direction, your hearts are nowhere near me. And he says to other people, like prostitutes and tax collectors, people who look like they're really far away from God, he says, your heart's pointed right toward me. So that's our choice. Live by the Spirit or live by the flesh. So choose, live by the Spirit. Have a good week. We'll see you next week. I mean, that's what it is, right? It's like, hey, it's like those two guys in 1917. There's your mission. Good luck. I mean, that's what the general did. He basically said, good luck, and then sent them out into no man's land. That was his strategy. Not a great military strategy. Send two teenagers out there. Good luck. I'd like to think about, I was been thinking all week about, well, so what does this mean? How do you and I live by the Spirit? What does this mean? What does this mean? And if I'm honest, like I understand what it looks like to live by the flesh. Some of you do too. I think about my life before Jesus. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. I lived far from God. I lived as what Paul would say, I lived as an enemy of God. Lucky for me, God treats his enemies by dying for them and coming after them. But I know what that's like. I know that. That's not confusing to me. What is confusing to me is how so many Christians that I know who live by the Spirit, or say they live by the Spirit, stop. Why do so many Christians fall away? You know, there's so many great things about living in the valley, in Silicon Valley and San Jose or in the surrounding areas. There's so many incredible things. But one of the worst things is that this is a transient area, and sometimes you develop deep relationships and then people move. It's the worst. How many of you have someone you love very, very, very much and they moved away? It sucks, right? It's just terrible. I've had this happen so often just because the life in the Bay Area. And I've gotten to observe this. And one of the things that's really, really, really hard for me is I have some friends who have moved and they've done real well. They're flourishing and their kids are flourishing and everything's good. And I have other friends and they're not. They're not doing well. God seems to have very little part in their daily life. Seems to have no part in their marriage, no part in the way that they raise their kids or even make decisions about anything. To use a metaphor, it's like they were once with us and then they untethered themselves from the space shuttle and they've just drifted away. And I can't find them anymore. And I don't know what's going to happen. And it's not going well. And it's really hard for me. They have a moment where they look back on the good old days with God. I don't think that that's how the spiritual life is supposed to work. When you look back on the good old days with God, I think it's supposed to be right now are the best days with God. And tomorrow's going to be even better. And then the chapter after that's going to be even better. And I don't know how that works, but I think that seems to be how it goes. I used to be close to God. And that makes me sad. More than sad, it makes me scared. I think about the story that Jesus tells about the son who says to his dad, I wish you were dead. I wish you were dead so I could have your money, because that's really all I want you for. And then the father gives him his share of the inheritance, and he goes off far away and he blows all the money and wastes it on wild living. And do you remember where he wakes up? He wakes up in a pig pen, eating pig food. And he says he comes to his senses. And he thinks, well, there's no way I can return home as a son. Maybe I can return home as a slave. I've disrespected my dad so much. And so he goes and makes a decision to come back home. He comes to his senses, how far he's come. And if you know the story, it says, while he was still a long way off, the father saw him and ran to him. Which I think means the father was looking at the hills and searching them for his boy. That's what I think. How do you force people to come to their senses? I don't know how to do it. I can't. But I think it would be better if instead of leaving the father's home, we stayed. And I'd like to think it'd be better for us to live life in the Spirit. So how do we do that? And it's pretty clear that vision isn't enough. We have to have more. I think about Dallas Willard, who was not just the head of USC's philosophy department for years and years down at USC, but also was an influential Christian thinker and writer. And he looked at the same issue. He saw people living and wondered why are they not living the life with God? What's going on? And he came up with a model for spiritual formation, which it's been very helpful to me. I thought I'd share it with you. He says we need three things. We need vision, but we also need intention and then means. And if any one of these lacks, then we will lack. Vision, intention, and means. Let me try to explain what each of these mean in my own heart as I've kind of processed this. Vision is when God captures your heart and gives you, I think it's a revelation for what life could be with God, what life must be with God. And then there's intention, that's commitment, where you make a decision and say, no more, this has got to stop, or I'm heading this way. It reminds me of that verse in the Old Testament when Joshua says, I don't know what all the other families are going to do. I don't know, but as for me and my house, here's what we're about. And then means are specific steps and actions. What are we actually going to do? I think if we don't have one of these, if our vision grows cold, we kind of drift into blaseness. If our intention goes cold, then we know what we should do, but it's just too hard and we stop. And if we don't have the means, then we have all the heart, but it's just like those two kids in World War I. Hey, good luck. Hope you don't get gunned down by the Germans. It'd be better to have a plan, actual steps. So how do we live this life? How do we actually live this life? What does it look like to live by the Spirit? Well, luckily, as I was thinking about this, it's Pentecost Sunday, and so we have an actual view of what it looks like when a bunch of people are together and the Spirit comes down and they begin to live it out. So I thought it would be good for us to look at that first group of Christians on Pentecost and Acts 2 and how they lived. And I'm not saying this is exhaustive, but I am saying that what God did then is not just descriptive, I think it might be prescriptive. We might be able to learn from it. And as we stare at what God did in Acts 2 in the lives of those believers, we might be able to map it onto our lives individually and corporately as a church today. So let's look at Acts 2 and stare at this. I remember early on, I was a high school English teacher, and I was invited to go to a church conference because I was helping and volunteering at the church I was at. And I went to this church conference, and they read Acts 2, and a pastor got up and said, who will help build this kind of community? Who will build these kind of beautiful, transformative, Spirit-led, Spirit-filled, Jesus-centered, world-changing communities? Who will give their lives to that? And I remember in that moment, I said, me, I'll do that. I want that. That was the beginning of me moving into the incredibly lucrative world of pastoring. I wouldn't change it for a world. But this verse grips me. This is, in my mind, one of the most important verses in the Scriptures. Here's what it says. Acts 2, when Pentecost, when the Spirit comes. Those who accepted the message, let's go, this is the day of Pentecost, let's go to the next one. This is how they lived. Those who accepted the message were baptized, and about 3,000 were added to their number that day. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. And everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together. They had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. And every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Acts 2:41-47. So let me just go through several things that we see. And as our church leadership and our elders went through Acts 2, we saw 7 core things that were going on in this early church. And look, I know the Christian life is more than these 7 things. I know that. But it's at least these 7 things, and it's not, at the very least, it's not less than these 7 things. Does that make sense? It's at least these 7, and then the rest of the life is just more and better and bigger on each of these. Does that make sense? So first, let's talk about that. And we have this thing called next steps, and there's these icons. Let me go through them, because these aren't just like, hey, this is not like a marketing message for Westgate to build brand loyalty to a church. This is discipleship and formation into Jesus likeness. This is what we're about. That's what I'm about. This is what we're for. So this has nothing to do with, hey, I've seen churches do this too. They're like, hey, come be a piece of coal in the locomotion of this big church. This is not what this is. This is about how do we become people who walk in the Spirit. So first off, a public commitment to Jesus says they were baptized. They were baptized. They gave their lives to Jesus. Then they corporately gathered to worship. They gathered together just like you and I are here. They continued to meet together in the temple courts. Then they grew. They continued to grow in their faith. They devoted themselves to the teaching and to prayer. Then they pursued ongoing relational connection. They were together. They broke bread in each other's homes. Then they served one another. It says they had everything in common. Then they gave sacrificially. They sold their property and possessions to give to those in need. They were incredibly generous with each other. And this was an invitational community. The Lord added to their number daily. Now, the Christian life is more than these 7 things, but it's at least these 7 things. And as I look at the folks I know who have drifted off, they just ignored all 7. In fact, a lot of times I had a buddy move, and I said, listen, before you move, I just got to let you know, you're not in a good place spiritually. You're not. And I know that you think that the number one priority when you move is to set up your household and set up your new bank accounts and find out where all the shopping centers are and all that stuff. But your number one priority is to find a spiritual community where you can actually fit in. So he said, yeah, I understand. And I said, it sounds like you're just giving me lip service. I'm telling you, this is life or death. Your family will begin to crumble. Your marriage will begin to crumble. It'll all go south if you don't do this. It's been 4 years. He still does not attend a church. It's the same question. How is it going? It's not going super great. Well, let me guess. You know what I'm saying? It's not rocket science in some ways. So I went through these, and I just wrote questions for myself. Now, what I did, I don't know any other way to do this. I just wrote questions for reflection for myself. Like questions I would want to be asked. And some of them I'm like, oh yeah, like for example, baptism. Guess what? I've been baptized. I don't need to deal with that one. That's off the table. But for some people, it's not. So I wrote some questions for reflection. I actually included them. You can scan the QR code on the chair in front of you, and you can take these home. You can maybe go through these with your spouse, with your friends. But as I think about our high school seniors who just graduated as they move to college, as I think about people who have moved out of the area or are moving out of the area, or I think about us who are here right now, I think these questions for reflection based on Acts 2 are worthy of consideration. Not to guilt or shame, but because I want to be people who live life by the Spirit. So, baptism. Let's go to baptism. Have I made a decision that Jesus is really it for me? Am I all in with Jesus? What's stopping me? Do I have questions? What do I need to move forward? I work with a lot of teenagers. And one of the things I see is there are teenagers who have like really big questions. I don't think it's responsible to ask somebody to make a very big, life-altering decision without having those questions addressed. I think it's completely reasonable to ask those things. And I think the spiritual life and the spiritual, the Christian faith has answers for these. So when I encounter students who have real big blocks, like maybe it's anger, or they see something in Christians that doesn't make any sense, or they see Christians behaving really badly and they wonder what that's about, or they've been betrayed, or they've seen bad examples like in the media, and there's so many bad examples in the media. They just have questions, and so I think that's completely reasonable. Like, what is it that is stopping you from making that decision? I think that's completely reasonable. If you've got those blocks, man, I'd love to talk to you. We have lots of different ways for you to begin to get those answers. I think it's completely reasonable to sit down and just say, here's my block, man. I just have these questions. I think that's completely reasonable. Archie and I would love to sit with you, or you can come up, or you can email us. We'd love to sit with you, because I think those are one-on-one questions. I think those are personal one-on-one questions. That's the first one. Maybe you got a block, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think to move forward, you got to deal with it. Does that make sense? You have to deal with it. Number 2, gathering. Do I make it a point to gather with a congregation frequently enough to remind me of who I am, whose I am, and what life is all about? Maybe your next step is simply gathering. This is what it is for a lot of people, coming to a church. I don't know about you, but I'm like a cheap balloon. Here's what I mean by that. You know those nice Mylar balloons that are silver, and you fill them with helium, and they're up for like 3 weeks, and they're on your ceiling, and then they finally slowly come down after like a month? I'm not like those. I'm like the stupid rubber ones that are on the ground 5 hours later. I leak vision. I need to be around other Christians on a weekly basis to remind myself with you guys. It's almost like a charcoal briquette. Like you remove them from the grill, they get cold, but you put them back in. I like get hotter because I'm around each of all of you. You guys help me stay burning. In the same way, it's like that. That's what gathering does for me. It's so important for me. This is my community. We're my family. I need to be around you. I love being around you. I need that. Maybe that's you. This next one's a huge one. Do I have people, this is connect, do I have people who know me and who I trust enough to see both my uniqueness and my blind spots and to call out both? I think the Christian life is impossible to live alone. And so we talk about life groups, we talk about meeting together. Like, do I have Christian friends? Am I in Christian community? Because I have blind spots, but I also have uniqueness. I need to be encouraged because life is hard. It's challenging, and I need both. We talked about summer meetups Rebecca did, and she talked about how there's all different types of them you can meet. This might be a great way to meet people. Another step might be life groups. I've had so many people say, hey, look, this thing of doing life together, that's critical. We got to do this. I've had people come to me and they say, I'm going to start life groups in the fall, whatever it might be. That might be you to take your next step, to stop living in isolation. The next one is doing a lot of work. It's the word grow. What's one area I need to grow in this season? And that's a personal question. That's a big one. That's a big one, right? That's a big one. We asked our congregation right before Easter, what are the biggest areas that you need help in to grow spiritually? And folks responded in 4 ways. And so over the summer, we developed 4 core courses. These are the 4 biggest ones. A lot of people said, my marriage. We got so many responses, people saying, look, it's not like my marriage is bad. It's just that it's not great. It's a 5. We're just going through the motions. I know that I need more than this. I know that life is better. I know that marriage is more than just going through the motions. I want to get better at that. We have a marriage course. It's phenomenal. I've gone through it a couple of times. We led it here at South Hills. I led it last summer. It's really great. We have a lot of folks who say, I've got a lot of trauma and damage from past relationships. So we have a licensed therapist and a pastor going through a course called Unbroken. We had a lot of people who said, hey, I don't know the Bible that well. And I know that knowing the Bible will help me know God better. And I need to grow in that. So we have a Bible course. I'm teaching that one. I'm not saying you should come to it, but I'm saying you should come to it. It'll be great. If that's one of yours. And then the last one is faith and work. We had so many people say, I feel like work is the biggest part of my life, and everything, God kind of fits in. I'd like to see how they integrate. I'd like to see, God made me to work, but like, I want to make sure I'm not in idolatry. I want to make sure that work's in its proper place. I don't know how to bring God into work. What does that look like? And so it's an awesome course. We have folks who are actually in industry saying, here's what it looks like to be a Christian in the workplace. That might be one of your four, but it might not be. There might be something else. Some other area, when you think and pray about it, it's clear that that's where you need to grow. And so take steps, grow, figure it out. Next is serve. Here's a question I ask myself in this season. What are my spiritual gifts? What are my natural gifts? What's my plan for using them for God in this next season? I think about this all the time. How can I, you know that parable that Jesus tells about the people with the talents? Some people have 5 talents and 3 and then 1, and they're supposed to invest them like to make like a profit. Like I don't want to be the guy who just buried it, right? I want to try to invest it. What are my spiritual gifts? What are my natural gifts? And do I have a plan? Can God and I work together to maximize those? Giving, money. Here's the questions I ask myself. Do I find myself worried about money a lot? Do I hoard it? Am I frivolous with it? What's my plan for involving God in my financial world? Maybe that's you. When I find myself worried about money a lot, it's usually a sign of deep spiritual issues, mostly with trust and provision. And so I need some work on that. And money can be like a specter for all sorts of things, security and comfort and power and all sorts of stuff. So it's a malleable idol. I want to make sure that it doesn't have a hold of my heart. So maybe that's a work that you need to do. And then lastly, invitation. Who in my circle of influence do I sense God inviting me to help on their spiritual journey? Our lives are made for other people. And so maybe part of my growth right now, if the other things are going well, maybe there's a deep sense that God wants to use my life to help other people on their spiritual journey. I wonder if one of those 7 resonated with you. What I'd like you to do is just take some time in the quietness of these next few moments or this week and just do some work with God and ask Him, what might it look like for you and I to be together, for me to walk in the Spirit in one of those. Maybe one of those areas is like it's pretty clear it's weak, or it's just an invitation from God. You know that you want to grow in that. Let's do that. I started with a military metaphor. I want to end with one. My buddy David Kim, who's preaching over at the Saratoga campus, we were talking about this, and I was like, what are you seeing in your friends, in yourself, in your circle, in your pastoral conversations? Do people most need vision? Do they most need intention? Do they most need the means? And so we went around and we talked about it, and we were just brainstorming and talking, and I don't know. I don't know which one, even in this room, I don't know which one needs to be reheated. But David turns to me and goes, have you seen the number 1 rated show right now on Netflix? And I'm like, please don't be the Real Mormon Housewives. Please, David, don't watch that. And he said it's on SEAL Team 6 and the hunt for Osama bin Laden. And so I was like, I hadn't heard of it. And so I watched it, and it was, again, maybe it's because my dad was military, my dad was Air Force. I lived right near an Air Force base, Wright-Patterson, growing up my whole life. But there's something about the military metaphor, and Paul uses it too, that really strikes me about life and death. If you're familiar with the story, after 10 years of searching, they finally located a compound in Abbottabad in Pakistan where they thought that maybe Osama bin Laden might be staying. And they had aerial footage of it. They knew exactly all the way it looked. They knew all the walls, the height, the building. But what they did not know is what the interior of that middle building looked like. And so what they did is they went to a black site, a hidden site in the middle of nowhere, and they began practicing. And these 12 Navy SEALs would rappel out of helicopters on top of that building, and they did it so often, so many days, that some of the guys began to develop tendinitis in their wrists. That's how often they did it for 2.5 weeks. And then he built a replica of this structure with the walls, the exterior and the interior. But the walls were modular. So when they would go in, they would do their training exercise. They would work on it for several hours, and then they would go to sleep, and a team would come in, and a construction team would rebuild that structure with a different, legitimate architectural design. And they did that for 2.5 weeks, so that every contingency might be possible, so that no matter what they faced, that they were ready to be successful. And I thought to myself, if that's true for the military, how much more true must it be for Christians in this day, when the stakes are so much greater than just life and death? When real eternities are in the balance, how much more prepared? Shouldn't we spend at least as much time in preparation and thoughtfulness to making sure that we're prepared for the battle that's in front of us? Because what's at stake is about more than just life and death. I'll leave you with Paul's words. The mind governed by the flesh is death, but mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. What's our next step? Will you pray with me? Heavenly Father, I just lift up us to you. I pray for folks for whom their vision has gone cold. I pray that you would give them, with your grace and your Spirit, just a revelation of what life with you might look like. Man, I pray that. Would you heat that up? I pray for those for whom intention might be their thing. Just a blaseness, just going through the motions, or just giving you lip service. I pray for deep Spirit commitment. I must in their soul. I pray for means, for those who need means, just how, God, show me the next step. I pray for just the vision to know the next step, but also the courage to actually do it, whatever it might look like. And in all things, God, I pray that we would be people who walk in the Spirit with your help. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Will you stand with me? We're going to sing the song, and in the song it says, God, you are my one thing, and I don't need anything else. And that's hyperbolic language. It doesn't mean, of course, we need things other than just Jesus himself. We need his church. We need all sorts of things. But what it's saying is, I center myself on you and you alone. I am pointing my whole life towards you. I'm reminded of that parable of the man who went to the field and he found a treasure in it and he sold all that he had. And that's the kingdom of God. Jesus says that's what it is. So as we sing this song, let us point our heart and say, Jesus, you are my North Star. You are the most valuable thing in this world. And I set myself towards you in life with you.